Hi everyone and welcome to another Gaffering here. In today's episode we're going to be looking at the Fiilex Q5s, which are a 5-inch LED Fresnel. These units are full RGBW, they barn door cut as good as any Fresnel you're going to come across, but they spot up with a very clean beam, much like that of a dado light. The units have full DMX control with sophisticated profiling, and they also have an IPX5 rating, which means you can use these out in the rain at absolutely any operating angle. Now these lights sell for a staggering $2,500 US. So I'm going to make the assumption at that price that if you're interested in them, you're a professional user. So we're going to gloss over a lot of the basics and get into the hard detail. Now before we go on with the review, all 4 of the lights here are mine. I paid for these with my own money, so my opinions are my own. And let me assure you, if you spend this much money on lights and they're crap, you tell everybody about it. So if there was a problem with these lights, you'd definitely know about it. All right, so let's have a look at what you get for your money. So you get the light, of course, which is beautifully constructed, nice and solid. You get a power supply. Now the power supply is quite heavy. That's because it's water resistant. It's IP67 rated. And the power supply is 187 watts. So the unit's 185 watts AC power draw, 165 watts DC power draw. Now the power supply connects to the light via a 3-pin XLR. Now that brings me to one of my first negatives with this light. The DC power input is 24 to 48 volts. So of course that means you can't run it off a single 14.4 or 14.8 volt V-mount battery, which I think is a massive oversight. Now on the power supply, the input side, it has a Nutrix connector. Now I'm guessing that's to maintain an IP rating, so it's probably a requirement to get the IP67 rating on the transformer. Then of course this end connects to your regional plug. Now you also get, with the light, an 8-leaf set of barn doors. The barn doors are quite good. I do have one criticism of the barn doors I'll get to in a second, but they're 8-leaf, so it gives you a lot of control. Now, in between the light and the barn door, there's a very minimal chance of spill here. So I'll just fire this up. Okay, no, there's a little bit of spill, but virtually no spill light coming out the sides, which is a plus. Now, I'll just take the barn doors off and show you the Fresnel. Now, the Fresnel is removable. You can just take it out like that, and now you've got a broad light source. So let's take a look at that. So very, very big beam angle there. So you could use this in conjunction with a softbox on the front, and you could light up the inside of a softbox. All right, so let's get on to brightness. So a lot of people have been comparing this with a 650 watt Fresnel. My call on that is that's crap. So if you have this thing set to 3200 Kelvin and compare it to a tungsten Fresnel, this comes in at almost identical to a 300 watt Fresnel. Now, of course, we're only doing a comparison here at 3200 Kelvin. Colored light is a whole different scenario all over. If you had 300 watt Fresnels and gelled them and tried to do this, you'd have no hope. You'd need probably a 2K tungsten with a gel to get anywhere near this light level. So bear that in mind with the figures. Now, in a second, I'll have the figures up here for 3 meters as well, so you can make your own judgments. Now, one thing to point out with these is the flood spot range. So the ratio between flood to spot is a staggering 8.6 to 1. So what that means is in full spot, this is 8.6 times brighter than in flood. So if you need to light something a long distance away, these things are absolutely fantastic for that. Now I almost forgot to mention that these flood spot using a bellow arrangement. Now bellow arrangements in the past haven't inspired me with a lot of confidence, but this one has 3 steel rods holding it in place. So you're not going to break the bellows easily. Now check out how good the optics are on this light. The light floods out to 55 degrees with an incredibly even beam angle. But check this out. The shadows are as sharp as you'll get off any good Fresnel. Add to that, you've got very good barn door control. And the flood spot is crazy. Right down to 12 degrees with an incredibly clean beam edge. Now one thing that might be putting you off buying these is the fact that they're only RGBW. So you might be expecting the color render to be a bit yesterday's hero. At 3200 Kelvin, I got a really respectable TM30 color score of 94. Now at 5,600 Kelvin, it came in with a really high score of 96, which to be completely honest with you, I wasn't expecting. Now after doing all my tests with my colour spectrometer, I think I figured out why it's getting such good scores for an RGBW unit. And that's because it has a broad spectrum blue colour emitter. Now in this graph here, you can see that the blue overlaps with the green. And on this graph here, you can see where the mid-white colour emitter is coming into play, which also overlaps with the red. So if we take a look at a daylight colour graph and only look at the sections that the human eye can see, which is what a TM30 colour test measures, you can see we've got the blues, the greens, the whites and the reds overlapping. So this is taking a very similar approach to something like an RGBAL light engine where it's using separate emitters overlapping to get a continuous spectrum. So I'm guessing the reason they've done this is because they only want to try and cram 4 sets of light emitters into this small space. Now the main reason I bought these lights is because I got sick of waiting for somebody to make a small Fresnel that's bicolour with decent DMX. So that's the main reason I got these. I actually didn't want the RGB. Now let's go over the DMX. I've got a few issues with the DMX to start with. Number one is the effects mode. So in the effects mode, you don't have a channel assigned to triggering the effects. So if you've got lightning going, for example, you can set the speed and frequency that it happens, but you can't actually trigger when it does. So that's a bit of an oversight. Hopefully that's something that can be fixed. The next problem I have with the DMX is in a lot of the profiles, you can change your fan speeds, which is absolutely awesome. But here's the problem. On the back of the displays on the lights, the fan speed doesn't change. So I got into a situation where I accidentally turned the fans off on one of the lights and I couldn't figure out why the light was overheating. On the back of the light, it said the fan was running at full speed, but it wasn't actually running. It took me a few minutes to figure out that I had the fan speed turned off with the DMX. So hopefully that's something that can be adjusted in firmware. Now, the only sort of real negative I have with the DMX is in terms of if you try and do a on-off command to the lights. So if you're doing an instant on-off command, the light has a very fast fade up, about 1/4 of a second, I'm guessing. Now the same thing applies if you're changing color. There's about 1/4 of a second fade up or 1/4 of a second transition between the two. Now, in terms of everything else with the DMX, the rest of the DMX is amazingly awesome. Let's take a look. All right, so just quickly explain the setup. They're running off Lumen radio receivers and they're running off an 8-bit profile. So let's have a look at how these things do a 5-second fade to black. Now let's have a look at a 2.5-second fade. This is a 1-second fade. And this is a 1/2-second fade. Now let's have a look at a 2.5-second transition. So we're going from 5,600 Kelvin to separate colors. Let's have a look at the same scene change, but happening over 1 second. And let's have a look at the same scene change, but this time in 1/2 a second. All right, so let's go through the pros and cons, starting with the pros. And the first pro is the build quality. It is extremely well built, extremely solid. I love little things like the rubber bumpers on the top. So, you know, it's got quite a bit of protection if it gets dropped or banged. And I love the fact that it's got feet on the top and on the bottom. So if you've got somebody that can't figure out which way a light goes on a shelf, which is, you know, a lot of assistants starting out just can't seem to get their head around it. It doesn't matter if they put it in upside down, it's not going to get scuffed or banged, it's not going to roll around, it's going to be protected. I like little details like you've got the crash bars here at the back and just the position of them. I like to sort of, if I'm going through the menu system, I find I just put my fingers through like that, resting my hand and navigate the menu system that way. Look, it's just really well built, really well thought out. You've got on the side here, you've got a little V-mount, which is a double finger release. You've got to press number one, and then press number 2 to get it to release, which means that you can't accidentally have a disconnect. which is pretty handy because if you've got this in a lighting grid with a power supply attached, the V-mount's upside down, but I assure you that that is not going to come out if you've got it hanging upside down. Yeah, the build quality, the ease of operation, it really is a quality unit. Now, I've had a few jobs where I need a colour tunable light that can give me decent shadows, and this thing has been a champion. In all honesty, I did buy these expecting to feel a little bit ripped off, but I've been pleasantly surprised by how they've played on set. And I think as long as you have your expectations on brightness correct, if you're expecting it to be at somewhere around a 300 and not a 650, then you're going to be exceptionally happy with these things, particularly when you stick them in a color mode. All right, let's get into the negatives. And the big overwhelming negative for me, something I just can't get past and I really hate, is the size of the spigot down here. So the light with its transformer on has a bit of weight to it, but I wouldn't call it heavy. I don't think it justifies having a massive spigot like this. And why I hate this spigot is this light would pack down into a nice small space in my van if it wasn't for this massive spigot. Now, the other thing I don't like about this spigot is the position of the threads. So there's two thread positions here. You've got about a 50-50 chance of these threads lining up with anything. So if I grab a Cardellini clamp here, you can see that neither thread lines up to the groove. So that's something to be cautious of when you're assembling these things or gripping these things over the top of your actors. You're not necessarily going to be in a groove. This one, on this stand, this one seems to fit okay. But if I go to this stand here, this is the same with about half of my stands. You can see there's a lot of play. I'll just get that up higher. There's a lot of play in there. It wobbles around a lot. So I find that incredibly irritating. So luckily it looks like it's just screwed in so I can replace it. So I get onto my next negative with this light, and it's to do with the fan menu. Now, the fans are really quiet. At the moment it's running at full speed, and I doubt you can hear it, but let's turn it down. So we've got variable, we've got silent, which is what I run them in all the time and I haven't had a problem. But here's the issue I've got. It's also got off. Now, when you set the fans to off, the brightness doesn't decrease. It runs at 100% brightness, and then it will eventually turn off when it overheats. Now, I've accidentally put it into this mode over DMX. Now, here's my next issue, or my next negative with this light. If you get an error like the engine overheating, instead of it coming up on the display telling you something useful like overheat, you get an error code. So I think the error code for overheating is 101 or 102. So the last thing you need on set is to look at an error code, try and figure out what that means, especially when you can't find any reference to the error codes anywhere in instruction manuals or on a website. Now, the next negative for me is the gels library. So at the moment, there's only 15 gels. So I'm assuming that at some point, more gels will become available in firmware updates. But here's some of the positives with this to start off with. So you can go and change your hue angle. So if this gel color isn't quite right, but it's very close, you can adjust the color slightly and you can adjust the saturation slightly. So, you know, that's pretty cool. But here's my main issue with the gels library. The gels library only hard switches between its base kelvins. And here's your base kelvin. You've got a choice of 3200 Kelvin or 6,500 Kelvin. I don't know anybody that shoots at 6,500 Kelvin. I think that should have been 5,600. Now, the last negative for me is the paint job on the barn doors. Now, let's be honest here. All metal barn doors reflect a little, but these ones reflect just that little bit too much, and it's actually given me problems on set. All right, so let's do a quick run through of the light, and it's going to be a very quick run through because this thing is really cleverly thought out. All right, so in your basic modes like your CCT or your HSI modes, where you've got 3 parameters of adjustment, you just use the 3 knobs, of course. So we've got our brightness here, we're in CCT mode, that's our Kelvin, and this is our plus minus green. Now you can press the buttons and scroll through presets. Okay, so I'll just quickly go to our HSI mode. Okay, so I'll just show you here, we've got presets. Pretty straightforward. Okay, brightness, hue angle, and saturation. So pretty straightforward. Now let's get into where this thing is genius. Okay, so in the menu, let's go to the menu system. You've got a choice of modes or settings. Now your modes are your manual operation modes. Okay, so we've got heaps of those. So they're your manual operation modes. They're also your DMX profiles at the same time. Okay, so if you want to set this thing up in DMX in CCT mode, you don't have to go fishing through submenus to try and find your DMX mode. It's your operating mode that you're operating manually is your DMX mode. Now, in terms of the amount of modes that you've got to choose from, or DMX profiles, if you want to call them that instead, we've got 75 modes. Now, that sounds like a stupid amount of DMX profiles, but you've got to bear in mind that half of those are 8-bit and the other half are 16-bit, roughly. Now, what I really like about this is it has what are called easy modes. So let's say you've got a client who's doing a conference, just a rentals client, and all they want is 12 lights that they can operate off a basic 12-channel desk like this. They don't care about RGB, they just want monocolor, they don't care about plus minus green, 1 channel per light. No worries. This unit you can actually set up what are called easy modes, so you can have a 3200 Kelvin mode or a 5600 Kelvin mode that uses 1 single DMX channel like in the old days. It's also got another mode that I haven't come across on any other light, and that is an XY mode that crosses over with CCT. So you can dial in a Kelvin, you can dial in a plus minus green, and then you can dial in a color that you've taken from an XY coordinate value. All right, so let's go back into our menu system and let's have a look at our settings. Okay, so we scroll across to settings. We've got our DMX address, so that's easy to set, just up and down. You can select your fan. You can select whether your dimming is smooth or sharp. So that's really handy if you've got shaky fingers. You can have a look at info, so that's your firmware versions, and you can do a factory reset. All right, so let's do a quick recap. Let's say I want to set this thing up in a CCT HSI DMX mode. All right, so let's have a look how easy that is. All right, so let's go to menu. Let's go to modes. Let's select our mode. So mode 4, CCT HSI. All right, let's go down to our settings and select our DMX address. It really is that straightforward to operate this light. All right, let's go through the data I've collected, starting off with average CCT accuracy. So between 2000 and 3000 Kelvin, it is accurate to plus or minus 31 Kelvin. Between 3000 and 4000 Kelvin, it is typically accurate to plus or minus 26 Kelvin. Between 4000 and 5000 Kelvin, it is typically accurate to plus or minus 24 Kelvin. And between 5000 to 6000 Kelvin, it is typically out by plus 71 Kelvin. Now let's have a look at our average TN30 color vector scores. Between 2000 and 2500, it is a 90.4 on average. Between 2500 to 3000 Kelvin, that jumps to a 91.8. Between 3000 to 4000 Kelvin, you're looking at 94. Between 4000 to 5000 Kelvin, you're looking at 94.7. And between 5000 to 6000 Kelvin, you've got an average of 95.5. All right, now let's have a look at our average white point accuracies, or delta UV. Between 2000 to 3000 Kelvin, it is typically out by minus 0.0016, which is about 2/3 of a 1/8 correction gel towards pink. Between 3000 to 4000 Kelvin, it is typically out by minus 0.0015. Between 4000 to 5000 Kelvin, it is very accurate, typically out by minus 0.0007. And between 5000 to 6000 Kelvin, it is typically out by plus 0.0018, which means it's splitting the Planckian curve and the daylight curve. Let's take a closer look at our kelvins, starting off with the lowest kelvin we can dial in. When I dialed in 2000 Kelvin, I got 2003, with a TN30 color vector score of 97% color render with an average 109% saturation. With the CRI scores, only R2 was above 90. And here is the very anorexic spectral distribution. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3188 with an SSI score of 78. The TN30 color vector score was a respectable 94% color render with an average 104% saturation. With the CRI scores, R3, R9, R10 and R12 are all below 90. Here is the spectral distribution, and the delta UV was out by minus 0.0018. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4452 with a TN30 color vector score of 94% color render with an average 103% saturation. With the CRI scores, R3, R10 and R12 are all below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the delta UV was out by minus 0.0005. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5646 with an SSI score of 80. The TN30 color vector score was 96% color render with an average 103% saturation. With the CRI scores, R3 and R9 were both below 90. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the delta UV was plus 0.0020, which puts it above the Planckian curve, but right on top of the daylight curve. When I dialed in the top Kelvin of 10,000 Kelvin, I got 11,261 with a respectable TN30 color vector score of 95% color render with an average 100% saturation. With the CRI scores, R9 and R12 were below 90. Here is the spectral distribution, and you can see how the red, green and blue color emitters come into play. Alright, let's have a look at how accurately these lights generate their color vectors. Red, which should be 0 degrees, came in at 1 degree. Green, which should be 120 degrees, was smack on. Blue, which should be 240 degrees, was smack on at 240. Yellow, which should be 60 degrees, comes in at what looks like a very impressive 61. It's doing this by using its color emitters and the white emitter. However, like most RGB lights, at this color vector, it looks green. If you want a good yellow, try dialing in 35. Cyan, which should be 180 degrees, came in incredibly accurate at 182. A magenta, which should be 300, was also incredibly accurate at 294. So with the exception of a green looking yellow, which most RGB lights do, this light actually had the most accurate color vectors of any light I've ever tested. Now let's have a look at how it does desaturated color vectors. Now it's worth pointing out here, in the mix modes, you can desaturate your color vector to any Kelvin at all with any plus minus green value. So I'm having a look at the HSI standalone mode. When fully desaturated, the light has a Kelvin of 6,826. Now I'm doing my testing with the light desaturated to 50%. Red came in at 358 degrees with 25% saturation. Green came in at 124 degrees with 27% saturation. Blue came in at 240 degrees with 28% saturation. Yellow came in at 62 degrees with 38% saturation. Cyan came in at 183 degrees with 43% saturation, which is incredibly accurate. And magenta came in at 259 degrees with 42% saturation. All right, that's another review done. So I think it really depends on your point of view. You're either going to love these lights and want to put them in your kit straight away, or you're going to think they're overpriced. I think it comes down to whether you need DMX and whether you need the clean light beams. I'm Andrew Locke. See you on the next episode of Gaffer in Gear.